I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach. Welcome to Improve Your Relationships, where I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma, which connects to the dynamics of dysfunctional relating and how these patterns of attachment injuries play out in our relationships. And for the sake of this video, let's talk about being fake, being a non-self, feeling phony, feeling like an imposter. And this also translates then into either our history of how we were in relationship with our family or other family members were in relationship to us, or also the partners that we choose. It's happening on both sides. This inauthenticity, this presentation that either is empty and hollow and comes across as having an aspect of being phony without any real depth or real substance. For a number of people growing up in a family where you're not seen, known, heard, understood in a way that you had caregivers and other family members want to enter your world, enter your inner world, enter your experience, to engage with you in a place that has an emotional component, a very active, immediate, lived experience of an emotional exchange where we feel a sense of connection, but simultaneously a curiosity that translates as an inquisitiveness to want to go deeper and know more about your thoughts, about your dreams, about your aspirations, about why you chose, let's say, going one direction versus choosing something else, and exploring your likes and dislikes, and being able to enter your experience. The phrase, the idea, put yourself, for someone to put themselves in your shoes. And it can be reinforce connection, reinforce emotionally joining in your ability to do the same, to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And in a way, we trade off, we're trading back and forth this experience of being curious and connecting through emotional warmth and awareness and a genuine interest to want to drop into what the heck is going on for the other person, and for them to do the same, what is going on for you, and that this cannot be surface level, everyday, simple, pedestrian conversation, which is what I refer to as talking about nothing. It really needs to have a bit of intelligence and purpose and focus. It's the art of conversation. People, family members, partners that we're with, in order to deepen into a connection and relating that is going to offer some dynamic exchange, we need content. We need some shared experience to focus the conversation and to begin to relate to each other's experience. If we don't have that, if we grew up in a way that there was a limitation on engaging, this is somewhat generational. A number of people, and still perhaps it's current, but historically this idea of children are to be seen, not heard. What a horrible parenting idea. That to not see the child is to create a very conscious choice not to engage with the child's experience, and that the child is to be on the periphery, go under the radar screen, not call attention to him or herself. And it gives the parent permission essentially to train themselves to ignore the child. Now, perhaps historically more is going on there and doesn't need to be, as of a pejorative interpretation or negative interpretation that I'm giving it. But the outcome for a great number of people who grew up in that generation or that's a parenting style that has continued to trickle down into families today, if there's a culture of not seeing the child, this dramatically limits the child's ability to have experience and practice connecting with people, and the child assumes they're not worthy of being seen, or just completely unconscious, don't even realize that you can be seen. That it's just surprising. Like, what the heck does that feel like? So if you go through your developmental years for a certain period of time where you're not seen, known, heard, and understood, and you realize that you have to up the ante, or you have to put a little more effort into being noticed, otherwise you're going to completely be forgotten because the family members are not making the effort to enter the depth of connection that's necessary for good, solid attunement to take place, for that exchange of harmony to really experience each other's point of view, or to enter each other's world view. And if the parent or the other family members don't really care to know you on that level, chances are that you develop some coping skills and some strategies. Usually this is subconscious, we're not thinking about it, but we have these strategies to get noticed, because if we don't, our spirit really suffers, and there is that part of us that needs to seek out connection and warmth and emotional attunement, and to make sure that we do get our relational needs met, we start developing personality traits that are going to solicit and invite attention. So some of us, it could take there's a bit of an easy playing of opposites here. I mean, some people become the black sheep and rebel and create drama to get attention. And then we have the other group of people who become overly accommodating and work really hard to be an overachiever and can be very, very nice, a very, very well-mannered child, someone who's involved, who learns esteem, who learns achievement-based esteem. That if you achieve something, you'll get attention. Well, then the equation is really clear. I guess I just have to do things really, really well, and then I'll get attention for it. And then over time, that will diminish, and that will lose its power. So then we have to up our game, and we have to do something even bigger, something even more. And this is how we get into perfectionism and how we get into needing to be these overachievers. There's also, in family systems, if rather much larger concerns of development are going unaddressed, that we very quickly get this core messaging that says it's not safe to be me. An easy example of this is a person who's coming into some awareness of their sexual orientation, falls outside of a heterosexual, the heteronormative culture, and falls outside of identifying with being heterosexual. And for that child, for that adolescent, growing up developmentally, is going to be receiving cultural messages that says, hey, wait a minute, it's not safe to be you. Actually, there's this very strong messaging that is going against, that is not welcoming you being yourself. And so a child in this scenario very quickly realizes, well, I guess I cannot really be myself. I need to develop a manufactured persona. I need to manufacture my presentation. This is also true. Think of anybody who has some kind of violation to their sense of self, That violation could come in any form of abuse, emotional abuse, if it's also physical or sexual abuse. This confuses a person's sense of self and confuses allegiances around, well, how safe is it really to be me? And when I let my guard down and I'm me, am I going to be violated? Am I going to be taken advantage of? This also shows up in families where it's referred to as a covert incest, or where a parent is using the child for their own personal well-being. Let's imagine that mom or dad cannot esteem his or herself, or let's say mom or dad don't really have a life outside of focusing on the others in the family. And over time, this is going to create a dynamic where the child realizes mom's whole world is wrapped up in me or in the child. And we realize that there's this imbalance of responsibility, that the emotional well-being of the parent is tied into how the child is responding and the child's well-being. And so that if the child's not happy, then mom's not happy. Or if perhaps, in this example, let's say dad's not happy, but now the child realizes, I'm somehow supposed to maneuver in a way and behave in a way to be responsible for dad feeling better. This shows up a lot in families where there's depression. A family member is depressed. Let's pretend it's the father. Dad is depressed. As we know, there's a kind of exchange or contagious aspect to feeling the depression in the home. And now everybody's part of this collective system of interacting with the depression. And the children realize that if that they can impact the family system and try to shore up dad's mood or dad's frustration or dad's anger. And now you have the children monitoring the adult mental state, the adult well-being of the parent, but from the child's mind trying to manipulate it in hopes of helping. There's an altruistic component, like the child wants to help dad, wants to help everybody feel better, but also that it's a strategy for the child still trying to get his or her needs met, to say, well, if we can at least get to the place where you're no longer depressed and you're engaged, then perhaps I might be able to be myself and be vulnerable and be open and offer, invite the potential to be known. So what's happening is you have a bunch of people in these dysfunctional family systems where essentially everybody's a stranger, nobody really knows each other, and developing these defense mechanisms and these personality constructs to try to get needs met in a rather backdoor, indirect way, because overall the family culture is people are not really connecting. And what this does is can create a layer or a level or a mindset of a shared collective crazy making. There's a crazy making component to people hiding, living guarded, not fully engaging each other. But here's the part that's the crazy making. But pretending, the word pretending comes, there's a fantasy component. Going through the motions that because this is what we know, we think this is normal. We say, well, this is connection. This is warmth. This is emotional relating. This is the parent-child relationship. No one has the ability when you're in it, when you're in the dysfunctional system, no one has the ability to say, hey, everybody, we're all fake. Look at how incredibly fake we are. And we're not really engaging. We're not really talking. You don't really know me. I don't really know you. And we're not being honest about how we're not relating, but we're pretending that we're calling this relating. And I don't know about you, but this creates an incredible amount of dissonance, cognitive dissonance, energetic dissonance in my body, somatic dissonance. I can feel I just feel disconnected in that system. If we do this enough and we grow up and we don't have the insight, the wherewithal to differentiate from it, and we soak it in like a sponge. This is the world, the environment in which we are brought up, that it very much can create an internalized sense of being fake. A better way of saying it is a false self. And now people don't really want to know my true self, so therefore I don't really have a lot of practice offering my true self. So I'm going to lead from a bit more of a manufactured false self, and I'm going to show up and my false self is a composite and a very, it was unconscious, but I've figured out what things I can do or use in my personality in such a way to monitor or to gauge the degree to which people get close to me and or that I can push them away. And I can accentuate certain aspects of my personality to be in the good graces, to get attention, to ultimately be liked. Because we have not really had enough reassurance that the family members really like what we like or really care to know what are our true interests and how we tick and how we think and how, the places of our concerns and our contemplations. This is one of the biggest, most reoccurring wounds for many people, and it's definitely reoccurring. It's the place when so many people are confused about not understanding why they operate from an insecure attachment style and while their relationships are essentially shit and full of suffering. And nonetheless, they look at their family and they say, well, I had a good childhood and my family's loving and there's some loving people. But nonetheless, they can point towards certain symptoms and behaviors that would identify insecure attachment. Oftentimes, the way to get to understanding that there was a certain amount of not being seen, known, heard, and understood has to do with whether or not the parent really wanted to know you. And if you play back the history in your mind, like watching a movie, were there moments where the parent was sitting down and really visiting with you? And images and memories of, did the parent really seek you out for counsel? And I don't mean counsel for their adult life, but I mean counsel as far as being an equal and important family member. And you can notice this, again, if you're doing some review, like you're watching a video of your life and you're watching these memories. You can also notice this or identify this based upon the body language of the family members and the parents. That did you notice in the body language of, let's say it's a sibling and in a family system, in your sibling, did your brother, did your sister have the body language that was turned towards you and open because they want to welcome your experience? When a family, if you had a brother or sister who was older, or even younger, it doesn't matter. But in this example of older, getting off the bus from school and coming home, did they greet you like you matter? Or did they just walk right by you and ignore you as a human being? Now, of course, we're getting into some complex stuff here because we go through chapters and periods of time where each child is differentiating differently and maturing differently and developing differently, and it could be a reasonable acknowledgement that some children go through these very moody disconnected periods where they need to be so isolated in their own egocentric bubble that they would ignore other family members. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying like it's a phase or it happened, 40% of the time. I'm talking about, no, this happened 90% of the time. And it was not just a phase. This is pretty much the ongoing experience of your sibling, your fellow family member, really did not make an effort to connect with you. And again, to link it back to parents, the same idea that you can have a reasonably okay, loving, wonderful, good childhood, but you still come out of it looking back, trying to do some life review, trying to look at, well, what was the quality of the interaction? And was the parent really seeking you out to sit down, to enjoy you, to know you, to spend time with you? You could also base this on what the family members, and if I just focus on, let's say, a parent, how did the parent actually spend his or her time? Like literally spend time. Is the parent working all the time? Is the parent preoccupied and busy, putzing around the house, constantly doing something? Or is the parent able to stop and connect with the child? Chances are that if you're listening to this, if you're aware that you have some insecure attachment style and you've struggled with some relationships in regards to how you show up and trying to discern authentic emotional connection, then chances are you can relate to this idea of how a parent did not really drop down into getting to know you. So then as I've already said, the byproduct of this is that you develop a phony, fake, false self. Now, here's the challenge with that word or those words, is that there's no such thing as a fake self and there's no such thing as an authentic true self. These are concepts, they're conceptual. We're trying to use language to point towards experience, but they're not concrete in the sense that we can, really identify and discern, yes, right now I am my true self. Look at how authentic I am. Or in the same way to be able to say, oh, look, I'm completely in my false self. I'm so false. I'm so fake. I'm presenting a manufactured version of who I am. The reason why it's so challenging is that this is conceptual language and that these feeling states and these states of mind are potentials. They're potentials that get activated and that we show up and we have glimpses and moments of clarity where we're coming from a grounded place where we're tapping into our wisdom self and there is a truth. We are in alignment with a bit more of a open, exposed, vulnerable self. And when we show up in the world unguarded, undefensive or non-defensive, and we're able to invite others in, we have healthy boundaries where people can come in, but we also still protect ourselves. And it's the experience of this level of vulnerability, of the exchange of being seen and also seeing others and offering that with a sense of generosity, but also unapologetically being able to let it in and feel good about your sense of self. We would say that when we are in a state, in that aligned state, there's a congruency with our truth and how we're speaking and how we're acting and how we're receiving the other person, and even a congruency in the present moment of the environment. It's this very complex, ultimately it can feel simple. There's a simplicity, but to talk about it, obviously all the words I'm using make it sound a little more complex. But in the complexity, it's dynamic. And when we drop into that place, we would say, well, I feel like I'm my true self. I feel authentic. I can really exhale. I'm unburdened. And the false self feels the opposite. The false self feels burdened, has a limitation of vulnerability, can feel very one-sided. And there's oftentimes, and this is true when we introduce the idea of codependency, we're overly focused on other. Just how do I need to behave to maneuver and morph myself? I can manipulate my presentation in such a way that I fall in your good graces, or I could assume that you like me, and I can, in a very passive or a covert way, try to manipulate the situation so that I get you to like me, because I'm actually guarded and protecting my vulnerability for fear that if you really got to know me, you're going to do what the other people in my history did, which is just not engage, not really care, not really make the effort. Now, the healing piece, or one healing piece, is it's so confusing because we think that the parent or the other family members or the siblings did this from a place of intention to be hurtful. And it can be helpful to go through a phase or a period of time where you actually think that they were intentionally being hurtful. That's just a way to reclaim your power and to use the power of anger to strengthen your boundaries. But at some point, for most of us, we move into a space of realizing, oh wow, my parents never even had this. And maybe you know your family history, then your grandparents never had. You come from this legacy, this heritage, this long lineage of people who are having children and creating families, and everybody's training each other to ignore each other and to develop a false presentation of a persona where we feel insecure about our real needs, our real wants and our real needs, because they have not been welcomed. And so you get this group of people together who are essentially hiding themselves, don't really have the skills to begin to engage the other family members, but we're going to go through the motions like we are collectively connected and warm and care about each other, and we're genuinely kind, nice people. And we understand the basics need to take place as far as life and being in the family. So, wonderful. It's wonderful the many parents who are providers and able to step up to the plate and do what they signed up to do, or even were very, very generous with the caretaking component. But oftentimes in these family systems, what's missing beyond the caretaking is the connection, taking care of the connection, the emotional connection. And there's a mindlessness. It's operating on autopilot. And there's a lot of assumptions in these family dynamics. We assume that we're close. We assume that we're family. We assume that we know the other person. This reinforces a crazy-making confusion and invites strengthening the presentation of a false self. So in my explanation here, I'm going back and forth between your own internal experience of how you can feel the emptiness. There's different types of emptiness, and this emptiness that I'm referring to is not a spacious one. It's an emptiness that's going to feel a bit nauseous and a bit like the bottom falls out from under you. It's a groundlessness, but it's not a groundlessness like floating. It's a groundlessness like you just fell off a building and now there's a sense of danger. And that's one aspect of a false self really has no anchor. And because we're so overly focused on how do I maneuver my false self in such a way as to make sure that my false self is being accepted and received and valued and validated. And while this is happening, I am not being received, valued, and validated. It's just my false self. What makes this even more confusing is that there's so much gray area here. It's not always true. It's not black or white, so that there are many family members, their parents in this example, and the parent did connect emotionally. There were these moments. It's not 100% black and white, and there are ways that the parent did authentically feel a connection with the child. So we're not dismissing that, and we know that that most probably happened. But over time, collectively, it has resulted in maneuvering, interacting through the lens, through the vehicle of this false, manufactured, manipulated presentation of self. Again, I just have to repeat, so much of this is conceptual, and just even hearing my words is crazy making, because you might get on board with the logic and the idea, but it's very easy in this moment to pop out of following the logic that I'm presenting and then just saying, okay, great that sure, I'm on board, but what the heck does that mean? How do I tangibly feel and know if I'm living my life as grounded in my authentic self, or if I'm a bit more leading from a manufactured self? One way to begin to assess that is to look at the symptoms, or look at how you're experiencing, how the degree to which you can receive nourishment in your life. Over time, you're going to notice how depleted you are, because it takes a lot of energy to uphold operating from a manufactured self, from a presentation of a false persona, from a false self. So it's a bit redundant, or it doesn't make sense to say the phrase false persona, because sort of technically the definition of persona is that it is a representation and a presentation of how you want the world to see you. It's a filter in order to gauge letting people in so that they get to know you. There is a goodness to that. There's a function to the persona. This idea of a fake self or a false self means that we have exploited the function of the persona to such a degree that it's toxic, and that we have overly identified with the persona to the degree that I am now my persona, and I don't have it being fueled or enlivened by the life source, or by the energy source, or by the source of self, or by my core being. Is no, think of this idea of persona is, I'm getting like this idea of like a computer app or a computer screen, or it's the way that you channel the information through, and the persona is the beautiful presentation of how the information is ordered and presented. It's the end product of, let's say, a user interface of you download some app on your phone, and it's like how you're getting, how the information is being presented to you is through the persona. The information itself, where it's coming from, the source, that's a little separate from how it is being packaged. So persona is how we package ourselves. Now, think about when you're with your family, and if the family members are packaging themselves in such a way that they're disconnected, they're going through the motions, they're not really allowing their life force, their truth, they're not revealing themselves, because they are also so overly focused on their on this manufactured presentation of self, this false self. And until you're of a certain age to realize this, that means that in your brain you have concluded, and you code into your brain, that false presenting is real. So did you hear that? This is really, really, really important. It means that you think, that you experience a false presentation of self that's lacking real vulnerability, that's lacking real invitation to know you. And oftentimes the persona is charismatic, the persona is shiny, the manufactured, this false self is designed to make people feel it's pseudo relating. It's if it's the false self, then it's the false relating. It's simulating. It's a facsimile of relating. If we grew up in a family where what people are really offering is a facsimile of relating, we don't really know how to discern the difference. So when we go out into our adult life, we are going to mistake a manufactured, manipulated facsimile of relating as authentic relating. And this is what creates so much of our suffering, so much of our struggle, so much of the confusion. Because our discernment has never been developmentally nurtured to really feel in our felt sense, to really feel in our bones, to really feel in our solar plexus this dynamic exchange of what actually happens when someone truly wants to sit with me, truly wants to hold me, truly wants to engage in a back and forth exchange, and to offer presence and to offer holding space. Most of us who have some history of attachment injury have not had this experience. And we have been given instead a substitute or a attempt or a facsimile of this type of presence, emotional openness, depth of vulnerability, a leading with curiosity to want to be known. And so we have a very, very low, well, let me rephrase this. We have a very, very high tolerance for accepting bullshit. We have a very high tolerance for inviting and welcoming other people who are fake. And oftentimes we unconsciously do our best. We're leading from our fake self. We find a wonderful, lovely partner who has a really great manufactured, well-oiled machine of a fake self. And now we're two people attempting to create some connection, but it's all being channeled through our limited software. Think of it as just, like your operating system. Your operating system just needs updated. It's just, you have a 1996 version is really what this comes down to. And we have to realize that this operating system is not working. One more thing to add here is that when we start talking about this and this idea of, is it fake and is it authentic and my true self and the family, and I pick a partner who also is leading from, a hiding behind, being very cautious, withholding, revealing themselves, but initially how they interact, their persona can be quite engaging. This creates a lot of confusion for people because it's very common. I can even hear people's voices right now saying like, well, does that mean the love is real? Does that well, that's so, or people get very, very scared in this moment because then they feel like their whole world is crashing in on them to say, well, then the love isn't real. Or how is that possible? That is not what I'm saying, and I'm not on board with that idea because I do believe that we're still operating from, if there is in a person that you're with, this could be a family member, but in this example of someone you're dating or in relationship with, is that the fundamental goodness of their humanity and just the we can't totally manufacture and make up being a human being and how we're interacting with someone. So that if there is warmth, if there are moments of love and moments of connection, and that is being experienced as a very tender, important, meaningful experience, I 100% am totally on board to say, yes, own it. That's yours. That's meaningful. That is an experience of love. What I'm talking about is that even though we have the love that comes through and that we are able to have an authentic moment of real tenderness, that in the bigger picture of everyday relating, we are not able to sustain and operate from a place of staying authentically vulnerable and to still be open enough to be seen, known, heard, and understood, and to invite our partner to be open enough to be seen, known, and heard. And then it goes both ways, that the partner too has the skill and the investment that has a value. The partner also values being open enough, vulnerable enough to sustain that level of authenticity and interacting on a regular basis. Usually what we get are people going through the motions, taking on a role. I'm the father. The father behaves like this. The father does these things. This is how a man behaves. This is this is how the woman behaves if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship. And these roles, these functions, we get caught up, if you have an identity in your work, like now we fill up, but we put a lot of filler, a lot of fluff, a lot of distraction, a lot of obligation, a lot of responsibility, and to the point where we dramatically limit even the possibility of authentic relating coming through. Usually we're leading from our agenda, both our expectation and our agenda. It's 7 o'clock at night and we have an agenda of how we're, supposed to run through the evening. We have an expectation of how the evening's going to go and how we want the other person to respond to us. And we know by 9:30 we're already thinking about going to bed, and then we flip into, doing chores around the house, and we're not even paying attention anymore. So overall, we don't even really give ourselves very, very many opportunities, because we like to fill our world up with routine and distraction and entertainment and numbing out and vegging out and even just hanging out, that we don't really, if you just look at just the number of hours in the day, we're not practicing this that much. And the same thing is true for the way we grow up in our families. If you really boil it down and look at the number of times, and of course this will be really different for many people, but a lot of people can just say, well, my dad wasn't even really around. My dad was working all the time, or my dad had a particular hobby and he was gone all the time hunting, or he loved his working in the garage or working on the car. That was his thing. And then he had his friends and he hung out. And if you really look at your life, you say, well, if we're looking at, let's just say, the first 18 years of being a kid in the family, there are actually like not a lot of times when connection and relating could have happened. And then the fact that it didn't happen solidifies and reinforces that the parent really wasn't there, which is the phrase that I like, the phrase there, not there. So I just want to repeat, I'm slightly presenting multiple ideas, but to hone in or to underscore, so that we don't create confusion here, that if perhaps you have this little panic moment of then doubting if you've ever experienced authentic connection or any type of love. I'm not a fan of the word love because it's so conceptual, and then you get into culturally, there's just such a mess of all of these ideas of true love and fake love and authentic love, which is the same thing we're talking about: false self, true self, fake self. And love is so subjective, and it's feeling based, and it's about feelings of affection and warmth and tenderness, but it's elevated to some concrete, tangible experience, even though we're talking about something that's intangible. And to me, it's much easier to talk about quality of attachment, quality of a bonding, quality of vulnerability, quality of emotional interaction. To me, that points towards love. Also, there's a definition or idea of love as the heightened culmination, the summary of an experience of relationship where you're completely invested in another's well-being, and that you really look out for them and you want them to do well in this world, and you have feelings of positive regard. Yes, that's love. I would think that that's love, but that's not really what I'm talking about, because that's also how parents are confused. Some parents get the feedback. They get the feedback from a child, and usually it's an adult child, and the child will say, hey, guess what? I realized that there's some painful stuff in our history, and we need to talk about it, and we need to work it out. And the parent then gets all confused, and also even can feel hurt or feel blamed or feel shut down, because the parent loves the child. The parent feels a complete investment in the well-being of the child. And so then the parent thinks that that is being called into question and or challenged, and that the parent has to either prove something different or can feel very hurt, and to assume that the adult child is saying, well, you're inadequate, you're not enough, your parenting wasn't good enough. That's not what we're saying. We're looking at we're breaking it down into the actual quality of the depth of interacting, of emotional exchange that strengthens the bond of attachment, and that has been lacking in many families. And for the whole point of this video, what I'm talking about is that when those key critical moments, and historically we have this ongoing non-reacting, non-interacting, non-relating, is this over time developmentally impacts a person's sense of self and impacts their persona and impacts how they are organizing internally, their internalized sense of self. And people are then confused about, who am I? Because I've really only felt that I've been valued for this false self, and that I'm still waiting. Pretend you're 27, pretend you're 34, pretend you're 44. You could be, 62 years old, and you're still waiting. When is my family member, when is my parent, when is my brother or sister going to want to know me? I'm waiting. I want to be known. I would really love to have a connection, a meaningful connection where we share an openness, an honesty of vulnerability, and we can practice a emotional give and take connection, valuing knowing each other. And until that happens, we will, for the most part, I personally don't know how to completely eradicate this loss in a way that we're completely free of it, because we're still breathing, living human beings, and we're still developing, and we can't manufacture that which we've never had. And to want it is a sign of sanity, and to want it is a sign of health, and to want it is a sign of compassion for the other family members. And to want that level of connection in your life, still with family members or even with others, it's still holding out to the much higher truth of the beauty of your value, that the beauty of emotional connection, even if you've only had glimpses of it, and even though you might feel wounded around having that denied to you in your own family. For people who come into this awareness, there's a real tender sensitivity of the goodness of wanting this level of emotional connection. Unfortunately, when we try to really explain how we know there's value in beauty in this level of emotional exchange, if someone is guarded and shut down and leading from their false self, and they also are very suspect and fearful of opening themselves up to that level of vulnerability, chances are they are going to diminish and deny and deflect and disregard you even mentioning and acknowledging how you know that there is a kind of purposeful beauty that is here when people engage on this level. It's quite profound, and this is how it becomes almost transcendent, and we start talking in terms of spirituality. There's a transcendent spiritual component to operating on this level of authentic connection. And for someone who is suspect of this or shut down, withholding, emotionally avoidant, and just fundamentally afraid of what I'm talking about, then chances are also they don't even know the value of it. So if you even try to explain it, you might come across as needy, you might come across as demanding, you might even be looked at like you're crazy, like you're not in the real world. Well, that's really pie in the sky. That's really Pollyanna. That's really naive. And I'm here to say, no, it's not. It just has to do with levels of maturity and the ability to hold on to oneself in the face of such naked vulnerability, and the ability to stay present and grounded in the flow of emotional openness. This is what we want. And many of us, especially those with attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma, we want it so much is because there's an inverse property to the wound. We've been denied it so much, we have been wounded so much, we have been hurt and crushed by not having this and this dynamic impacting us so heartfeltly, if that's the word, it has impacted us in a way that's been so heartfelt that we are holding out for this higher vision of what is possible in emotional relationship, what is possible in our love relationships. And if someone doesn't get the urgency of what is at stake, we know what is at stake because it's already been lost, or we're still in the process of reclaiming it, and we know that we deserve better. It's as if the wound, the crushing wound of being ignored in some capacity, of being abandoned in some capacity, in being not seen, known, heard, or understood, to be neglected in some way around your sense of self and your being. If you've had that crushing wounded experience, then there's a paradox that oftentimes what it does, and if you're listening to this video in this moment, then chances are you're totally on board and you get it. And what we all get is we say, well, it wakes up, the paradox is it wakes up the value of saying, I need this, I want this is important, and I value emotional connection because I know what it's like to not have it. I know what it's like to be denied it. And I'm not one of the people who have been wounded in such a way where I go into a deep sleep and I disconnect and I dissociate and I withdraw and I'm avoidant and I'm shut down. I'm one of the fortunate ones who this has actually cracked open the truth and the goodness of the desire, in that this level of emotional connection is possible. But if you're trying to explain this to someone who is shut down and does not have the consciousness to even let in the words that you're saying, you are going to be perceived as, a poet, a visionary poet who is talking these very lofty, transcendent, spiritual terms that's not going to translate to the other person. And then that person might give you feedback that, well, that's crazy, that's Pollyanna, that's naive, well, that doesn't really exist. Welcome to the real world. Relationships are not like that. So it's like talking another language. In those moments, there's not going to be a meeting of the minds in those moments. I hope that this video was helpful, covered a lot of ground, talked about a number of different things, of trying to name this dynamic of how a false self gets manufactured, and just looking at different iterations of that expression, and playing with these ideas of how, because we have had this experience, it does wake us up to holding out for the star on the horizon, or for the beacon on the horizon, to say, I know there's something better over there, because having been crushed and hurt through being denied emotional connection, it wakes up my own awareness and consciousness that it is actually possible. The challenge then is saying, well, the people I've surrounded myself with up to this point, I keep picking the same people who do not hold the vision of the star on the horizon. And I pick people who do not have the ability not only to value the beacon, at the end of the tunnel, or, off in the horizon, but they can't even see it. They don't even know what we're talking about. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for listening. More videos to come. If you like this video, and I keep saying video, it's more of an audio at this point because it's just the audio. But nonetheless, if you like this and want to hear more similar ideas and explore these together, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. And then also, if you want to learn more about me, please do by going to alanrobarge.com. And thank you for listening. Until next time, bye.